Okay, look, let's dial back 200 years or a bit more and go to Adam Smith. There used to be this guy called Adam Smith who wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. And like 70% of all ideas that modern economics explores are kind of contained somewhere in that book. Anyways,
he's always coming up.
The baseline model of competition, or how competition is supposed to work and lead to the wealth of nations, goes something like this, right? So there's a baker on one side of the street, and there's another baker on the other side of the street. And these bakers have absolutely no interest in the well-being of society. What their interest is in becoming rich, all right? So every morning they wake up, check out what the other baker has done in terms of baking bread and what they price it at, and try to steal market share from each other, right? So the one baker says, well, we have the same bread. The other guy sells it for £2. I shall undercut the price and sell it for £1.50. Presumably, that means all or most of the customers come to my shop. And I could just sell way more bread. But of course, the other baker does the same thing and wants to undercut him. And the result is that the bakers offer cheap and well-tasting bread to the population, not because they like the population and care about that, but just because their individual self-interest, as if by an invisible hand, right, leads them to compete and attempt to steal market share from each other, and hence leads to the wealth of nations. Okay, right? So the traditional way of thinking about a lack of competition goes like this. It says, well, these bakers at some point are going to realize that this is not a way of making a living to compete with each other like that. They are going to just meet over a few beers and cigars in the pub next door and just decide that the price of bread henceforth shall be £4 instead of £1.50.
Right.
And that's called price fixing or collusion. And since a bit more than 100 years ago, tends to be a criminal offense, and they go to jail if they get found out. And that's about it. Okay. Well, but there's a more elegant way of undermining competition. It goes like this. The bakers say, hey, why don't I sell you 50% of the shares in my bakery? And I don't take money for it. I just take 50% of the shares of your bakery instead. And this way, you own 50% of your bakery and 50% of mine. I own 50% of my bakery and 50% of yours. And the effect of that is that we don't have to agree that the price of bread is the monopoly price, say $4 or £4 a loaf. But every day we would have incentives to undercut it, to steal market share from each other, but we took away the incentives to compete, right? Why is that? Because if I went to undercut your price, well, I would steal market share from your bakery, but I'm really stealing market share from my bakery as well, because I own 50% of it. So the only effect me attempting to steal market share would have is that market prices would be lower, and the value of my portfolio would be lower as well, okay? And you can see where this is going. Where this is going is that nothing here is confined to this being 2 bakeries and 2 shareholders. There could also be 8 bakeries, and the 8 bakers each hold 12.5% of the respective bakeries. They're fully diversified, so to speak, but that removes the incentives to compete, okay? So let me be very clear. The point here is not that the 8 bakers collude in order to undermine competition. The whole point is that you don't need to collude anymore when you're fully diversified, because there are no incentives to compete in the first place that collusion would have to overcome. So the point is that diversification across competitors takes away the incentives to compete. And therefore, well, I mean, why would they compete if they don't have incentives to do so, right? The more modern equivalent here is that the big asset managers, for many reasons, including the one I just explained, simply don't have an incentive to push firms to compete super aggressively against each other, or reduce costs and, I don't know, start fights with the union, fire employees and whatnot. And when you hear the public statements by the BlackRocks of this world, they're full of, oh, we don't really do anything with portfolio firms. We have nothing to do with the firms firing their employees. Well, and also we don't get involved in competition. We would never talk to firms about competition. And the point is, yeah, that's the problem description. That is the problem description. In a capitalist system, the shareholder is supposed to talk to management about product market competition, namely to entice them, to push management to reduce costs, to fire the employees, to somehow produce the products at a cheaper price and steal market share from the rivals. And this very basic capitalist incentive basically gets lost when the firms get increasingly controlled by the asset managers. And I say control in the very specific sense of like sitting on these control rights, but not using them, or not using them to the effect of, pushing firms to compete super aggressively against each other.